this level, this is where we're going to find and be very close to the potential pivot top. And on that point, I'm going to define pivot top for you guys. It does not mean it's the all-time high potential of the moon. This is simply a statistical analysis of where liquidity is going to dry up and where the bulls are going to get exhausted and where things are going to pull down from. Pivot tops are typically the peaks that you see in a chart, and pivot bottoms are the lows. And you can have pivot tops and pivot lows in an uptrending market. Each time the pivot low is a little bit higher than the previous pivot low, that tells you that the trend is intact and we're continuing to climb. And so right now, for me, the pivot top is between 114 and 116. I believe we're going to hit that by next week when Michael Saylor takes the stage. Bitcoin typically rallies before Bitcoin, and I think, Tim, I'll come to you for a minute. Isn't it true that we normally rally into the Bitcoin conference, and normally it's a buy the news, sell the news? What's your memory of that?
Yeah, no, I was actually talking about that this morning with our VIP group, that usually there is a sell-off. Now, what was interesting about last year is that all things before that we saw in the conference, last year was actually some volatility. There was actually rallying during the conference. It was right at the end of the conference that Bitcoin started to pull back. That was new. That was different. Actually, usually we fall before the conference. I'll tell you this though, Josh. I don't like always looking at events and saying, well, every time in the past this has happened, this is what happened. If Bitcoin has had like 20 conferences and all 20 conferences the price crashed, then I would be like, yeah, like that's enough times. There was no thing happening. But there's only been a handful of Bitcoin conferences. And in the world of Bitcoin, the minute you think you have this system figured out of what it does every time, that's usually when it fakes out on you. For example, every time in the past, Bitcoin does not hit new all-time highs before Bitcoin halving. What happened last year? We hit new all-time highs before Bitcoin halving. Every time in the past, a 4-year cycle would say altcoin season is the consistent. If it had continued, altcoin season should have started back in December. It gave us a fake out. There was a moment there where Bitcoin dominance plummeted, but are any of us saying altcoin season truly launched? It didn't. I don't know if I'm a big fan of saying just because there's a system that people are used to, you should follow it. For example, I'll give you another one. You guys ever heard the expression sell in May and walk away? That's a very common expression. Terrible advice for this year, right? This would be a terrible year to have sold in May and walk away. But
actually, historically, May is green, been green 7 out of 14 times. So actually, not just this year, but a lot of previous years. You're right. It's September is usually the most bearish month, actually, and no one says sell in September and go away. But you're 100% right.
It doesn't rhyme. Josh, will you allow me to fight you for a second?
Absolutely.
You said on the show we have a fight here. Can I fight and do a little pushback on monthly chart MACD analysis? Now, I want to preface this. Josh has been doing TA way longer than me. I love learning.
You don't have
Josh.
to. Hit me, brother.
But it's just something I'm sitting here chewing on. If you go to my screen,
yes,
and I'll minimize the others here. Oh, did not want to let my MACD up. So we're talking about this crazy explosion of MACD right here. All right, absolutely right. I mean, it's astronomical. It's a 16,000, right? I've never seen another chart where I've seen the MACD come to 60,000. Maybe Josh, you know of one because you've looked at more charts than me. But to me, I don't know if I would necessarily consider that fair because, yes, it's astronomical compared to the 2021 highs. And then you barely even see the 2018 highs, and you definitely don't see anything happening back in here unless you back out and you only take a look at those local time periods back here, in which case, in this period of time, I think argument would be made, man, that's an astronomical MACD process. Then you go up and it goes even higher. And then even higher, and even higher. And I was cross-referencing, for example, let's go take a look at the S&P 500, where if you were to take a look at the S&P 500, let's minimize RSI here, and just take a look at the MACD. The S&P 500 is doing the same thing. But again, if you go back into the history of it, you zoom in and you take a look at it, it's all a comparison game, right? It comparatively, 99 looked absolutely crazy. But if I scroll back, and I go back here into the what is it, the 80s? I mean, you can make the argument that this peak here in 1987 was historically just enormous. Oh, we need a major correction, right? Well, I don't see that on the chart. I see the S&P 500 continuing to climb. And my overall point that I want to make here, Josh, is, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's good to be aware of this curvature. There's a lot of people talking about this curvature, almost act like Bitcoin's going to flatten out, maybe have a little correction before it finally goes. Everything up into this point, and I'm going to kind of mark it, everything up until this point right here, if I can grab it, there you go. This is all retail investors. This is, institutions did not touch Bitcoin whatsoever. This is just regular people like you, like me, buying Bitcoin and it going berserk. What happened in 2021 is the emergence of institutions and companies getting involved in Bitcoin. This, of course, one of the big reasons why Bitcoin exploded in early 2021 was when Elon Musk announced that Tesla was going to start stacking their Bitcoin. All of a sudden, Bitcoin goes berserk, right? Let me get rid of this line here. Well, why do we have a big pullback in May of 2021 and have a long downward summer? Because institutions like Tesla and Elon Musk, they sold some Bitcoin and expressed concern about environmental impacts. We began to see the emergence of governments and institutions suppressing Bitcoin, talking about how terrible the technology is, actively shorting against the process. Why is that a big deal? Because that's where the real curve gets going and starts to pick up momentum. This boring side of this curve has come from when institutions started saying, don't buy Bitcoin. They started shorting it. Bitcoin's evil. You get the picture.
Well, okay, but let me, I want to better understand you. First of all, I appreciate everything you're saying. But here's the question. Volume, no matter what the reason is, we now have institutional adoption and interest. Larry Fink is drooling over Bitcoin. He wants to control it all, buy all the miners, buy everything. Why is the volume decreasing? Could you address that from your point of view?
Yeah, I would say, are we going to say that there's, go back to my screen here and I'll show this. Are we going to say that there was actually more money flowing back here in 2012 and 2013 than there was here in 2021 or even right now? No. That's going to have to do, obviously, with the asset being, buying one Bitcoin way back here, we're buying at $3, right? So you can buy a whole lot of Bitcoin, and that makes the volume look really big. I would actually make the argument, Josh, that the low volume right now with the high price is an expression of how bullish we really still have to go. I think what's going to happen to mark the top is a spike in volume. I mean, take a look back here at these tops. I mean, this volume is all lower than the 2011 and 2013 volume, but this spike in volume, January 2018, bull market top. This spike in volume right here, while it wasn't effectively the top, it marked pretty darn stinking close. I mean, if you had sold on that volume up here at $59,000, $58,000, that's pretty good. I mean, that's a pretty good top. Even if you had held out to 69, it's a pretty good selling top. We have no big volume coming in, and one of the reasons why it's tapering off is, again, just how much more valuable each Bitcoin is than it was comparatively to the other times. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for this volume to pick back up and see the massive institutional money, see more retail come in. That's when I would say, when you see that spike in volume, that's when I think you should be concerned. That spike in volume is the last bit of buyers and then exit liquidity of people taking profit and running the hills.
I love what you're saying. I'm going to give a quick thought on volume, and I want to make sure I get a couple more important details, because even though I'd love to have a 4-hour show, I don't think people would get exhausted. Thank you, Tim, for that. I'm going to take you guys into my chart. I'm going to talk to you briefly about volume and the clues that it gives us to what will happen. So here's the 2021 top and the second higher high. And the biggest volume bar right here, which was signaling that we're getting very close to the top, obviously preceded the first top. And then after that, the second biggest bar was obviously this selling bar, which was an early signal that we were cascading into the winter, right? And then after that, when we got that second top, we actually had no volume, no surge in volume, right? And so let's just keep an eye on that. First of all, I disagree. I want to just go on the record officially thinking that I love Tim's point, but I do not agree I think I'll be watching for a spike up in volume, but I would agree with my point that the institutional adoption has not led to the FOMO, but it's leading to more manipulation, and it'll ultimately lead to more price stabilization, and we're ultimately going to continue to see volume go lower and lower because they're going to control it. They're going to control it on the back hidden ledger books, and that's the way. It's the reason why AMC never shorted, and it's an illusion. The idea and the story that the supply and demand are going to come to a head, and this is just going to break out it's going to break out when smart money has their bag full, and this decline in volume is an early signal of the fact that it's becoming a mature asset. That's my view. All right, real quick. So here we have the largest spike was this initial spike. This is the largest volume bar that we had right here, okay? That coincided with our very first top that we got back in March of 2024. Now we have a secondary volume bar, but it's smaller than the previous, and it coincides with that big push up that we got all the way to 100K. And now we are up higher, almost by 116, and the smallest volume bar on the chart is down here. Now, for a classic technical analyst, this either one of two things is going to happen. This buying momentum is going to dry up, and the bulls are going to get exhausted somewhere in my range. And I put it on the chart so you guys don't have to guess what it is. My pivot 1 is this 116. My pivot 2 is this 128. And either we're going to get this magical volume node that Tim is... I'm messing with Tim. That Tim's imagining out of nowhere that's going to shoot us up into the stratosphere, or we're going to get a repeat of the last cycle, which is sort of neutral momentum until the end comes. I'm going to give Tim a chance to rebut me, and then I'm going to give you guys the line in the sand that tells me that the up move is over. So what are your thoughts on what I just shared?
I think very good points, and I think it's okay to agree to disagree. It's in the world we live in right now, people act like if you disagree with someone, that automatically means you hate them, which is very wrong and very false. It's okay for us to disagree. I'm excited to see who's right. I think my only contention would be, I liked how you pointed out that the biggest part of the volume came during the upswing. I think that's a very good point. There was a second peak if you looked at that volume. I think you were looking on the weekly chart. I could be wrong.
I'm on the monthly chart still.
Okay, I have to. Let me pull mine up so I can just address that with you. The big volume that came in here. Okay, you are. The big volume that came in here is during the upswing momentum. Here's what happened in that month, though. If you look at that, that's January. January was when altcoin season started. So if you were to look at let's just do the weekly chart, for example, and I can find that. So this is where there was a miniature little pullback. But if I go to the weekly chart, which had more volume in it? This little move right here, or the descendants back down? And so the monthly and the weekly, they can tell different stories. I just lost it again, so let me find it. I apologize, everybody. They tell different stories, but at the end of the day, what I see is a spike in volume for some purchasing, some selling, overall excitement, and another one saying, hey, we're selling off here. And then what happened is the markets are so drub at this point. Yeah, we have a nice size, boring little nothingness for the next top. But this cycle, we haven't gotten any real spike in volume. You can call this one here right there, and maybe this is your point, and maybe I have to give this one to you. I disagree, but maybe you would say, Tim, this was the spike in attention, and we're working on the second leg that's going to be boring, very similar to 2021. And that works if you follow this sense that we're going to repeat what happened in 2021. I would say I'm probably more of a believer in following what happened back in 2017, 2018 with massive retail adoption of Bitcoin. I think we're seeing massive institutional adoption. Let me say last thing, and then I'll throw it back to you. Again, governments fought Bitcoin in 2021. Institutions shorted Bitcoin in 2021. That part is true. What is happening right now? Institutions are lining up at the door to buy Bitcoin. Governments are not just wanting to buy Bitcoin. We're seeing lock up Bitcoin that will never leave. MicroStrategy, CEP, these are businesses built on Bitcoin holding, never selling. governments like the United States, China, India, Russia, even other countries have began those conversations about creating their own Bitcoin stockpiles. Anyone who sells, any smart money who sells their Bitcoin, they're just pretty much donating it for a cheap fee to institutions and governments who have a longer-term picture of Bitcoin and are going to hold it for a long, long, long time.
Let me ask you a question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I respect that you'll give me the straight skinny on it. Are you going to sell your Bitcoin this cycle?
No.
Let's hit.
Hey, I will be selling some Bitcoin this cycle, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why, because it's never going to go up in a straight line. We saw it come down. If you held Bitcoin at 109 and you sold some or all, you could have bought it back at 74, 75. Let's be smart, people. We don't have to have a one-size-fits-all towards our trading strategy. We could have diversity there, and someone holding all their Bitcoin and keeping it over multiple cycles, great, that's fine. And I believe that person, and Josh has indicated that he's likely never selling his Bitcoin, can be an absolutely fantastic strategy. You can use it as collateral, borrow, buy things against it, loan it, earn yield on it in the future. I think banks will even be allowed to custody Bitcoin. You maybe have it parked at the bank and even have it insured by the FDIC. Who knows what's coming down the track? But I'll say this, when I see a top coming, I'll be looking at cashing in, because I'm a trader and I'm here to make money. And I love it. Buy and sell high and buy back lower. And so that's what I'll be doing.
Thank you. I don't mean to cut you off. I really value what you're saying, and I think it's very applicable to a lot of people that are listening. I'm going to try to push through, because we're getting right on the line of it being longer than I want it to be. I'm going to quickly show you guys this chart, because it'll be important for me to make my point. When we were down here, and if you've traveled with me for a long time, when we were down here, I called the bottom, right? And when we were here is when I bought the majority of my Bitcoin, right there, right under 27,000. And at that time, in this window of time, if you've been a member of my show for the last number of years, I said that my ideal profit range that we would hit in the course of time this is when there was no believers, right? This is when it was hard to be a believer. My take profit, or my profit goal, was 80K, okay? So that was my initial target given back here. And when we got up into this consolidation phase in this area, I said we've got to reevaluate what it's going to be like. Obviously, I didn't sell any. And in that environment, I said we would eventually drop to 73, and that we would likely go on to get to 116, and that I would have to reevaluate from there. I'm going through this because it's important. If all the stars were to align, and a lot has to happen on the macro environment, I need to see China, I need to see the Ukraine-Russia war end, I need to see credit worthiness come back to the U.S., I need to see China buying our bonds like they're going out of fashion, I need to see all the trade deals worked out, and I need to see a Fed that says, hey guys, I'm giving you back-to-back 100 basis point rate cuts, okay? Now, in this environment, and that's news that I can't predict, I'll call those some swan events, orange swan event, as someone said. If all that came together in one foul moment, then it would dramatically change my top prediction, because the macro would change. The macro would change. And as far as what Bitcoin
didn't realize I don't know what I'm doing, then I got off real quick.
To what Tim said a moment ago, it would be more like the 2017, 2018 rally. Bitcoin could go as high as 173,000. That was all stars aligning top, okay? Now, we don't have all those good things happening right now. We've got a ton of question marks on the macro and a lot of unresolved problems. And there is a fair amount of bullishness in the market and a fair amount of bearishness. Both the bulls and the bears are showing up to Wall Street each and every day trying to fill their bags and make it their cash ATM. As a result, in this immediate time frame of everything that I can see in the charts, taking into consideration price and the momentum indicators, I find my pivot 1 to be 116K and my pivot 2, which is my extended rally number, 128. And if we get up there and the buying holds and the momentum flattens out but doesn't turn down, and we look like we're going to take another leg up, we'll evaluate it then. But the big question that I have for all of you is, what is your trade plan? I have found success and am making good money on Wall Street because I have disciplines and a daily trade plan that I stick to. On everything I enter, I have a strategy of when I want to get in and when I want to get out. I'm not moved by the crowd. I'm going by my drum and my drum only. I love listening to these guys. I love hearing their points of view, but I'm following myself and my trade plan. And as I told you guys, if we buy in between 80 and 73,000, I said we will get back up to 110. I said, and I'll be locking in profits when others are getting greedy, and I'll have made some more money. I will have made some more money. And I don't need to be very greedy. I don't need the tippy top. I don't intend to sell my Bitcoin right now. I haven't been given an incentive to. But let's talk about this, okay? If it pulls back, to what number is the run over? How low can we go if we hit 116,000 in my view and 120 as the initial target for Mark's view? If we get into that range and we begin to have a little bit of sell-off after the Bitcoin conference, how low can we go and still be in an overall uptrend? I'll give my answer last. Tim, would you give me yours?
Yeah, I would say I always hate these types of questions because you put a number and then the price drops to it, and it's like, all right, does that mean I have to turn bearish now? And it's not that. So I'm going to give an extremely low one. I'm going to say as long as we're putting in higher highs and higher lows, I'm going to remain bullish. So let's go 74,400 and some change. That's going to be, if we stay above that low that we had in early April, I'm still bullish. Now, I think I'll give a clarification there. Again, I purposely went low there. I think at that point, if we get to 116, I would be surprised if we drop back down below $100,000 at that point. I think $100,000 would be a very strong level of support. But I am not willing to say, oh, if we drop below 100K, I'm automatically bearish and I'm going to go down. In the same way, Josh, I think I was on your show before. By no means do I get everything right, because I remember being on this show saying that I thought that 90K would hold, right? It didn't. Did that mean I all of a sudden said, guys, we're in a bear market, we're done? No, I was wrong. I was wrong with me. I readjusted. I said, okay, 74 to 72 range is going to be my zone. Ended up being right about that support level, and now look at us, we're back at all-time highs. So I'm going to say, let me drop below 74 before I get bearish. But realistically, I think it'd be probably slim that we get below 100,000, in my personal opinion.
I love it. Thank you for being direct so people can understand you, because people are showing up here because they're wanting to get some clear answers. Thank you for that. All right, my man, Mark, not Tim.
Yeah.
What is, do you have a max threshold, thou shall not pass number?
Yeah, I would say I would not want to see a full weekly candle open and close below the 50-week average, moving average. And I think we see that it's over. Currently, that's sitting at around 80,000. So if Bitcoin was to suddenly capitulate below that level, that would be my line in the sand. So that's a line that's already always moving, and you can add it to your charts. But historically, when there's been a weekly candle that has opened and closed below the 50-week moving average, that has always been the end, and I would expect that to be the case as well. But I'd also agree with Tim as well. I think it's important that we maintain that bullish structure and continue to create higher highs and higher lows there as well. So from a price point, if you're putting me on the spot there, it's going to be, right now it's at 80,700. Of course, in a week's time, that could be a little bit higher. It's creeping up, but that's my line in the sand.
I love it. Okay, I'm going to give you mine, and I'm going to tell you guys what to expect in the remainder of the show. First of all, I think this show should have more likes to it. Normally I have 1,000 likes, but you guys must have been so engaged and so intrigued that you just didn't even think to take a minute and smash that like. If you could, pop up my likes. It feeds the video out to more viewers. It grows me, it grows Mark and Tim, and we'd all appreciate it. Thank you, guys. If you've made it this far, we're probably doing something interesting. All right. Where is my line in the sand that if the price crosses back below, I believe that it will lead to an absolute moment of fear and a cascading sell and a continuation of red candles that we will not recover from. Because I believe that we're late in the hour and late in the Bitcoin cycle. And I believe that when we make our tops here, unless they continue, I believe that
I'm over here
the
watching
largely going
this
to be booked.
Bitcoin
Let me show it
stuff.
to you in the charts. Drum roll.
Now,
Absolutely.
we'll get on Simmons,
For a
but I
fact,
don't know if you're going to come back. You feel me?
101,500. We
Because, you know, I
cannot
got to
break
actually
that
end the stream.
anymore, or the cascading of selling begins. I want to throw out a little bit of agreement with Mark and say that the secondary confirmation, so I've got a pivot 1 for the bull case and a pivot 2 for the bull case. Well, my pivot 1 for the bear case is 101,500. My pivot 2 would be a candle that opens and closes beneath the 50 on the weekly. The red line there is the 50 EMA, and if we get a candle that opens beneath it and closes beneath it, you're going to hear me out here saying that we have absolutely entered into the winter season. All right, so in my mind, you know, you guys do with that as you please, but I remember those who were saying, oh Lord, if this gets back to 110K, I will promise you I will sell all my crypto. I just want to remind you, remember my face. I'm here to remind you. I love this. So I'm going to let's talk about one more question, and that's the answer of when. When is this going to come to pass? How much longer would you guys think, and I think we've already heard, and obviously I'm going to be the conservative guy on this show, but we're going to get around as to when do you guys get nervous and you think that we're too late in the bull cycle for there to be a higher high? I'm going to give mine. And remember, these things get recorded. They're posted on my show. We're going to be back here in 2 years. I'm going to be snippeting and playing this stuff over with the two of you. And it's going to, you know, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. But let's let the family know. I'm going to start with you, my friend Tim. When do you think enough's enough, the top's behind us? Is there a timeline for you?
No, there's not. So I'll be very brief. Four-year cycle, in my opinion, dead. I think we're going to look a lot more like how stocks have looked in the past. I have put predictions with mathematical equations talking about summer to fall of 2026. I don't have a date. I actually genuinely don't believe that we'll ever see like a 70% pullback on Bitcoin ever again, barring a Great Depression type of situation where people have to dump in to feed themselves and do things. I'm the crazy one. I'll start off with crazy. You guys give the more sane takes, but I just don't see the four-year cycle playing out. I think it's gone.
I love that. It's a very it's a strong take that people have been putting out there, that things have changed and the four-year cycle is dead and we're not going to have the peaks and valleys that we previously had. I will say in response to that I somewhat agree. I believe that we're entering into an out of a stronger pattern from the past, and I do, in my opinion, see crypto running with the overall macro market. I believe that as institutions adopt it, it's going to take on the characteristics of institutional trading. In some cases, it's going to lead. In other cases, it's going to follow. And I believe that we're not going to go as low in the winter. That was another one of the questions, and if we've got time, I'll throw out what the winter low might be. But let me just jump in and Tim, let's get your response real quick. When is it too late to be bullish on Bitcoin?
I was going to say we need to come up with a new name here. I like this one here. I've got one here for you. Hear me out here.
Did I say Tim?
Wait, I've got it here, guys.
Everybody's Tim.
It should be. Please address me now. Stocks with Mark from Tribal Investing Group.
There we go. There we go.
I love it. All right, Kiwi Mo, stop causing trouble. When is it too late to be Bitcoin bullish?
Look, I would say that
historically
we should see an end of the cycle. You know, usually November, December. I think it'll come a little bit earlier. However, I think there is an argument to make that Bitcoin could continue and not go into as much of a bear market as we've seen in the past, because it has the ETF, it has that institutional buying, and maybe it ticks along more closely correlated to the stock market. And the charts do support that, where Bitcoin has been more correlated to the stock market. It's actually, you could say that it's kind of front-run the stock market in some respects.
Yes, I agree.
It's up with the stock market, and it's pumped, and are we going to see the stock market go after it? And then, but altcoins have decorrelated and decoupled from Bitcoin. So I think altcoins are going to have their usual bear market. Their winter is going to come. But like I said, I don't disagree with Tim. I'm not saying yes 100% that we're not going to see the usual 4-year cycle out, but there's certainly an argument, and I wouldn't be surprised if we did see Bitcoin track more with the stock market and not have its usual crypto winter. And I would agree, I'm not sure
I wish there was another web, you know me, I like to.
70%. Of course, it has in the past, so it will until it doesn't, and maybe this will be the time that it doesn't. But I would certainly say for altcoins, we are going to see altcoins go into a bear market as well.
All right, that's wonderful. I want to give you guys my prediction.
Damn, you just left
this.
purple like
I want you to
that.
remember everything I'm saying, because it is always an if then. Because that's the way it is. The market is not one-dimensional. It's not two-dimensional. It's not even three-dimensional. It's got dimensions I cannot see. It's got surfaces beyond my ability to grasp. But I do believe that if the macro environment changes and shifts
I'm gonna go pick up
wildly
bro.
bullish, then this would not be the case. Okay, we could
Oh,
enter
he's
into
driving.
a different blow-off top scenario. And there's some smart analysts that I follow who also see the potential of a blow-off top in stocks and crypto coming. I've talked about it on my show and alluded to the fact that if certain technical indicators fire a certain way, right, one of them being on the SPY that we close above 595 with volume, then it means that the stock market's going to continue to climb through the summer, and we're going to get all the way up to 633 on the SPY. Now, that is a best case scenario, right? It's an if-then scenario. Now, if we remain in the environment of uncertainty in which we are currently in, where nobody quite knows what the Fed's going to do and what type of deals are going to get worked out with World War tariff, and we are obviously hugely dependent on interest rate cuts, in this environment of uncertainty, without huge bullish catalysts, I believe that it's not rational to be Bitcoin bullish after July. I obviously have the most conservative view, but my view is also dependent on other macro events coming into line for it to change. If those events have not come into line, and we have gotten between my pivot 1 and my pivot 2 of 116 to 128, and those events have not come into occurrence, and we begin to fade the top and cascade under 101 500, I believe, and we're past the month of July, then in my mind, the winter is upon us. And I'm going to give one more Q&A round for these guys who I think have done an incredible job, put up with my fire today, and given great answers and stood on their own views, which is what all of us are expected to do. The next question is, what will be the future Bitcoin low? How low do we have to go? These guys more than me view that there may no longer be a winter. I still believe in the winter. I believe in the extended downturn and the events that drive Bitcoin and the altcoins. I believe that will continue. But I do believe that because Bitcoin's become a more mature asset, we're going to see less of a downdraft. We're still going to see the alts get annihilated down to 90 to 95%. Some of the better alts might hold up to around 84% down. But Bitcoin, I somewhat agree with them that it may not go down as much as it has in the past. I'll give you guys
and there's no gas in this, bro.
Which is actually based on how high we're going to go here. But I'm going to ask these guys if they
I'm not gonna make it that
form
far.
of a prediction. I won't hold you guys to this
Let's see
one
if it's a
because
car.
analytically you really can't figure out the bottom until you found the top. But if you had to guess at the bottom today, starting with my man Tim, no, Mark, this guy here. I'm just joking.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So to me, the number comes down to I could see a 50% pullback on Bitcoin when we hit the next. Hey, let's have a good correction here. I think we're going to see several 30% corrections between now and the next couple of years. I think the next bear market, I'm thinking of roughly 50%, if that. With that said, again, I'm going to stick with some of the predictions I made. I'm predicting no top. A pullback could happen in July. I actually think a pullback in July makes sense, Josh. I think another pullback at the end of September makes sense. Not bear market, pullback. I think we'll see pullbacks every couple of months, but I believe we go into 2026, potentially even the end of 2026 before we see a bear market. And by that time, is Bitcoin at 250? Is Bitcoin at 300? I don't know. 50%. Let's just pretend. Let me take a stab at here and say 300,000, 350. That's a very key level on Fibonacci extension, by the way, as you start to play those out. If that was the case, and I stick with 50%, could we pull back down to 175 at some point, maybe 175 to $200,000 range? But again, this is all based on the precedent, or based on the thought process. We are in an extended cycle now. I also want to make sure to spell any FUD about myself. When asked, Josh, I think you and I are in the same boat. I think you already did. Am I going to sell Bitcoin? I am not going to sell Bitcoin. I'm 31 years old. Bitcoin is going to become my retirement. Bitcoin is going to be what I pass on to my children. I am going to take profit next year on my altcoins. I am trading Bitcoin right now. I'm in a massive long position on Bitcoin. I am going to take profit. I'm going to buy a house next year. First house I've ever owned. I'm going to invest in other businesses. Crypto will be sold. But there's only 21 million Bitcoin on the planet. There will never be more. There's more than 60 million millionaires. I own a couple Bitcoin. Why would I part ways with that when it's the scarcest value asset the world's ever seen? I'm going to ride the waves. I'm going to add to the Satoshis every chance I can get. Altcoins, on the other hand, we trade those. We sell those.
I love it. All right, let's expedite these answers because I also want to squeeze in, or maybe I won't. I have this topic of where are we at in the altcoin season? But before we get into that, Mark, would you give us your potential bottom? I know we can't be too clear on it, but where would you consider
my whip want to do
again?
some flipping stuff at the wrong time.
Hey, if this thing tumbles
I
and
had
falls, I'm
crazy
going to reload
loot
when
too.
everybody
I need
else
to
is
mark
too
this
afraid,
fuck.
because it just continues to do extremely well. I mean, it went from 15,500 to right now almost 111,000, and that's a massive move. And you know, that's a game-changing, wealth-changing event in anyone's life, is to get on top of Bitcoin when it's down on its lows. Where's that low going to be, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, if we start a capitulation now, which we won't, but if we did, the 200-week moving average, simple moving average, has generally been a good guide, and that's sitting at about 48,000. Let's just say that we get to around 130 to 150. I would agree with Tim. I think we can see
my
like
guy.
50%, 55% correction somewhere around there.
Appreciate
and
you.
That the 200-week moving
I'm about to go
average
pick up my loot real quick.
up a fair bit higher, which will put us somewhere in the
Thank you,
high
Sage.
60s
Appreciate
to
you.
the mid 70s would be that. But you are very right. It's very difficult to say until there is a confirmed top in. And that's what enables you to nail that 70.
I got smoke with this dude. I got smoke with him.
Area because a confirmed top had already been in, and then you're able to accurately give guidance to within a few $100 of that being the bottom, Josh. So I would say the same thing based on what I can see right now on the charts. If we get that 130 to 150K top Bitcoin, which is I think is a reasonable and realistic target that we can get to, then I think somewhere in the high 60s to mid 70K.
Okay, I love it. And I'll give you guys my prediction. I'm going to take you into the chart real quick. First of all, we don't know where the top is, and so the top can dramatically change things. But
Bro just left? Oh, I hate people who leave when they die.
So back here in 2017, down to the winter low, there was an 84% drop. An 84% drop. Of course, there had also been multi-thousands of points of climb. So at the time, that's a pretty big drop, but you know, you got to take into perspective of where it came from. I mean, the move began here at $162 and ended at 20,000. So it pulled back from 20,000 back to 3,000, but it was an 84% drop.
And he took my med kit. Oh.
this thing ran up obviously to 68,000.
And my guy, okay, now I see why he left.
Which was back from 3,000. It ran up to 68,000. Boy, what a story does that tell? It says you've been sleeping on Bitcoin. You don't like money. So then this thing pulled back into the winter all the way down to 16,000. And that was a 77% move. Okay, so we went from an 80.
Let me get my points though. I'm getting my XP.
The last two pullbacks that we got off of the all-time high, 84 and 77 back in 2021. So I am not imagining that we're going to do greater than 70%. And a lot of where we pull back to has a lot to do with how high we reach. If we were to get to just my pivot top of 116, and we were to pull back at a conservative 60%.
My guy really might die to the storm.
Okay, which shows an enormous amount of maturity in the asset. It's a huge drop in volatility, a massive drop in volatility. It gets us, this number is not correct, let me fix it. It gets us down to 46,000. Okay? And so if we were to climb up to my pivot 2 of 128,000, then it means that we get down to 57 in this little bit more conservative take on things. And so, in my mind, I had said this in previous videos, that I'm going to be tempted to buy anything below 60K. I'm going to be aggressively buying by 50K, and I'm going to be loading the boat anything under 50K. So this is my drooling range for the future. I believe that we could, now just keep this in perspective, we almost 10x. We didn't 10x, but 15,000 back here, right? This was the low, all the way from 15 to 110. This is about an 8x. I don't know off the top of my head. If you guys want to give me a more specific number, that's fine. But it's not quite a 10x, but we get up to 128. This is going to be an 8 to 10x. If we were to get up here and pull back to 50K, and we were to get a 10x, you're talking about something between $380,000 and $500,000 potential in the next Bitcoin bull cycle. And so you can understand why we're not sleeping on this and why we're talking about it with so much passion today, because that's game changing. That's game changing. You drop in $100,000 in the future lows, and this gets up north of 300,000, which it could easily do in comparison to previous cycles. You're talking about, life-changing, pay off the house and the car,
I'm not getting on. Thank you, Kay. I don't know if you were watching.
Let's go one more question. This one's got to be brief and short and